Today, we're going to be looking at the process of putting motions through the SPC on the PPNs, which is the Strategic Policy Committee on the Public Participation Network. So they're all your acronyms. And then we have at 7:45, we're being joined by Guss O'Connell. He's a South Dublin councillor, and has involvement in public participation and the community forums before the PPNs. He's worked on lots of campaigns as well, including herbicide campaigns. And then we'll look at specifically a herbicide motion that people have wanted to put through, and we'll have a look at some of the lessons from other motions that have gone through. So the first thing to do is meet with your linkage group to discuss what issues you'd like to see tackled in the county. So that's kind of step one for any representative on the Strategic Policy Committee. The second thing to do would be, in your linkage group, write a motion that tackles the issues you want to look at. And now we'll get into the kind of details. Don't worry if all your questions are popping up. Thirdly, persuade the chair of the SPC to put a motion on the agenda. That's a big one. That's going to have a lot of possibilities in there. Fourth, when the motion is discussed in the SPC, you have to be tough in fighting for your motion. And fifth, be tenacious. Just keep at it, keep going and going with it. And if it doesn't get addressed, bring it up again and again. So we'll get into each one of these with a bit more detail. So firstly, about your linkage groups, you meet with your linkage group to discuss what issue you'd like to see. So a linkage group is a discussion group and centered on a specific topic. So for example, a linkage group could be on the Climate Action and Energy SPC. Now, some linkage groups might not be active. So if it's not active in your county, ask your resource worker to set up an initial meeting. So you see there, I put in as well that you can use what we're going to talk about today, so the herbicide issue, as a carrot to attract people to the meeting. And it's been noted in many counties that there's a lot more success in attracting people to an initial meeting if you have a topic to be discussed. So if you put it out there to the PPN members that you're going to be talking about herbicide, and you have this idea to put it through, you'll get people coming along rather than just saying, well, we're having a meeting to discuss things. Once you're in the linkage group, write a motion that tackles these issues. So you can have a draft motion on herbicide already written to bring it to the linkage group for discussion. And in that, you can introduce attendees to the concept of the linkage group, and just some notes as well on kind of getting things into your, kind of making a motion that will fit into your SPC. So you look at your SPC's work plan for the year and see where your motion fits with their work plan. So they might have something about biodiversity or something similar in their work plan that you could link a motion about herbicide into. And then remember that it's a policy committee, so motions should be related to specific policy that is possible for the local council to implement. So if it's something that they think the national government should be looking at, it's likely that they'll just fob it off on them, or so make sure it's directly related to local council and what they can implement. And so finally on the linkage group, and then we'll open up the kind of topic of linkage groups up for discussion with everyone here. I just wanted to go through, for those who might not know, what is a linkage group. So I touched on it a little bit, but basically a linkage group is a discussion group for certain topics that are discussed within the council committee. So like a topic around an SPC, or some PPNs have them set up in that they just have an environmental linkage group, and anyone and everyone who wants to work with environmental stuff or interested in environmental stuff comes to that, and the various representatives on the different SPCs all come to that if that's related to the environment. So if they're on the energy SPC, if they're on the biodiversity SPC, they can all come to the environmental linkage group. So ask your own resource worker how it's set up in your PPN. So with the PPN Rep on the SPC, which is some of you's, you meet with the linkage group and you report to them on some of what's being discussed at the SPC meetings. So you'll bring back the agenda and the talking points that were going on at the SPC back to your linkage group. You have a discussion, and together you can ask for clarifying questions or give input on upcoming agenda items. So then, as well as that, you can work together to draft motions to put through the SPC, and the SPC rep can then bring that motion to the SPC for discussion. The next section of getting something onto the SPC, which is persuading the chair to get the motion on the agenda. So again, this is kind of general orders. So getting something on the agenda of an SPC, whether it's a motion or a point of order, is generally done through the chair of the SPC. And the exact method differs in each county, so do check with your resource worker, because I can only speak in generalities. As most of you here know, all the PPNs seem to work differently in various ways. So generally talk to the chair between your meetings to get your point on the agenda. So as I mentioned, you can check your county's adopted SPC scheme, which is what I showed the example from Kildare, as well as your council standing orders for specific information on the process in your county, or ask your resource worker as well. So again, as kind of came up there has been issues with this around the country, with some not getting this in time. So because you're meant to come back to your linkage group and have time to have a discussion and come back. So yeah, there has been issues with reps not getting the agendas and stuff like that in time. But that's something that needs to be fought for. So some of the issues that may arise, I think we've kind of spoken about these already. Your agenda items always last, so there's never time to discuss it. Has been something that's happened before with people. So speak to the chair and ask them that it's put first at your next meeting, or in a fair place next to other items that haven't been reached at the meeting as well. So if no agreement can be reached this way, fair discussion of the agenda items may need to be fought for elsewhere. This is kind of where you'd want to get your resource worker involved, and you might need the more kind of direct approach in fighting for getting things onto the agenda. And then other issues that may arise, representatives on the SPC not being aware of the issues that the motion is trying to address. This is something that I haven't really heard of, but I'd like to know if it's a possibility and if anyone knows of anything like it. So many SPCs have presentations given by outside experts on topics that are being discussed. And so I thought one of the things that could happen is that you talk to the chair about getting an expert in to address the SPC on biodiversity loss and the role that herbicide plays in it. And so it could also address issues like water quality and human health. And this was, I was thinking of in Dublin City, in the original motion on herbicides that went through in 2017 and 2018, the biodiversity officer, the then biodiversity officer Shane O'Casey, he did a presentation to the SPC and all about alternatives and stuff like this that could be used. And the original scheme they adopted for herbicide use was off the back of that. And then the motion being put through by Dublin City is kind of building on that again. So that could possibly be a way of creating awareness within the SPC. So you kind of have that backing of fact behind you, and councillors and other reps on the SPC are aware of where you're coming from. And then, yeah, before, as I mentioned, before speaking to the chair, look at the work plan of the SPC for the year and see where you can slot the herbicide in with it, see what you can align it with already. Just lastly, when a motion is being discussed in the SPC, be tough in fighting for it. Fight for your specific wording or actions that you want included. You know, the council might try to water it down, putting in may instead of will, this kind of word play, and have your facts on hand, and also have the wishes of the community in mind and fight on their behalf. As we mentioned, you know, you're there for the wider community, and don't be afraid to stand up and say, look, this isn't being heard and this is what the community wants. I know, I've been talking to them and this is what they say. So just be strong in what you want to say, and yeah, don't back down. It can be daunting for sure, but I think that's kind of when a lot of things start moving. I'd like to introduce Guss. Thanks, Guss, for joining us. Guss O'Connell is a councillor in South Dublin City, and he has years of experience in public participation through the PPNs and through the community forum. And he also has worked with getting campaigns through the council, as well as on herbicide campaigns. So I'm delighted to invite Guss to share his experience, and to just hear what any kind of insight you have to share with us would be most welcome. Over to you, Guss.
Thank you very much, Catherine, and thank you very much as well for facilitating me, because the other meeting that I'm at, I'm going back into it again afterwards. We're actually running very late. Can you all hear me okay?
Yep.
All right. Yes, okay. Thank you very much. And I know there's at least one person in the audience that I will be familiar with. I think that's Justin Byrne. I think you said there might be more than that, but certainly. Secondly, that little bird you have there behind you in the in your screen as part of your backdrop is a very patient fisher, and has to sit on the side of the bank for a long time in the hope that some monster will come by that they can nip. And I'm afraid that is a bit like your work and my work in the environment. We have always to be vigilant. We have always to be out there making sure that our views, our concerns, and our ambitions, that they are well known and that they are well promulgated and teased out at every level. That's the first thing I would say to you. The second thing I would say is in relation to SPCs themselves. A great idea, but in my experience, they can be rushed. Too many items on the agenda, too few meetings over a period, over a year. Subcommittees should be there. So one of the bits of advice I would give you would be to try and make sure that in the areas that you particularly want to have teased out and brought into policy, that you would engineer it so that there is a subcommittee set up to deal with it. The third point I would make is, one of the questions Justin asked me was, how can you frame motions to bring them forward for SPCs? The bad news is, if you like, that motions aren't encouraged, which is kind of peculiar. Now, I'm open to hearing what members here on other county councils and city councils, what their experience is. But in theory, what should happen is that an item is on the agenda, which is part of policy, and that the SPC teases that out. What I was saying there is that because meetings can be very far apart, and because you need to make sure that the areas, now all of the environmental SPC is very important, very critical, but there are at times, as we are at the moment, where we're looking at insecticides and stuff like that, where it is important that they're not just passed over with a kind of a nod and we're looking after it and we're doing our best. And so therefore, when you can't really put forward a motion because they expect that the way to do it is that there's an agenda drawn up, and within that agenda, your concerns should be noted. That doesn't leave you with much control on the areas that you want dealt with. And it's one of the drawbacks of the SPC system. However, what I would strongly recommend you to do, each one in your own area. Number one, what you're doing here is great. You're meeting each other, you're exchanging ideas, you're exchanging information, you're equipping yourself with the facts. Very, very critical, very, very important. And then when you, as somebody was saying there when I came in, when you come to your July meeting, you hopefully will right across the country be bringing forward the same concerns at every SPC. And that will be surely very significant when that happens. Now, the way to bring that about, in my experience, is get to talk to two people, especially the chair of your SPC and then the meeting coordinator. Every council has an official whose job it is to service the SPC. Get to know that person well, and tell them, I would like to have this on the next agenda. Now tell them now so that there's a good, lead-in period. Secondly, when you have some written information, pass that on so that it can be in turn prepared and ready for circulation before the meeting. We all hope that people read and study and take notes on these reports. Very often they're given on the night, which is not very satisfactory. And it's one of the drawbacks. But certainly I would say, bring to the attention of, first of all, I would say befriend, if you like, the meeting coordinator. Make an appointment, meet them, and introduce yourself. And in general terms, of course, you will be looking for them to buy in. And one of the ways to get them to buy in is to let them know that the priorities that the council are dealing with at the minute, what's on our next agenda, and they'll kind of have an idea about that. So you would be very interested in that, naturally enough, because you're getting them to buy in turn to what you want them to do. And then you say, look, I talk to you about something very specific? And they may, in turn, put you on to somebody else, the director maybe of the environment, or some other official within that department who technically are from a more informed background, can discuss with you what it is you want to get on the agenda. Now, they may fob you off with just reading that little piece there. They may respond by saying, look, whatever it is, give it to us in writing. Let's be honest, most local authorities are understaffed, and they're still recovering from the effects of the pandemic. So good and bad bits in that. And some of the bad bits was that they were working away from their desk. They didn't have access to the kind of files that they might have liked. And so they have had to manage as best they could. And now that's changing. They should not have that drawback anymore. But it does mean that we should be able, at a given meeting, to have a much more in-depth presentation on any particular item. If you look through the minutes of SPCs, and I'm now in the process myself, by choice, of moving from the arts SPC to the environmental one. I wanted to go on that at the beginning of this term, but another colleague was anxious to get in there for a period, and we agreed. So he's stepping out now, and I'm stepping in. And reading back through the minutes of the SPC over the last couple of years, not just the last year, over the last couple of years, I can see very heavy, very busy agendas, very little there except it was discussed. So-and-so, made some observations, and they were responded to by an official X, Y, or Z. And that's the report comes before the council, and the full council kind of nods and says, and this is not a criticism of us councillors, but it is a criticism of the system. Environmental SPC took place, housing SPC took place, noted. And so if you want the hard work that you're putting in to bear results, in addition to making sure that it's well discussed in the SPC, send an email as well to the members of the county council or the city council, and bring to their attention the fact that you are a member of the SPC, that you are representing Ontashka, representing whoever it is, and that you're giving them some information that is very important. You will discuss it further with them if they have the time to do that, but that in any case that you would ask them that they support whatever piece of policy it is at the next meeting, and that they would specifically ask, not just nod it through, but it would. I don't want to keep rabbiting on too long. I'm not sure how that's hitting the kind of territory that your members there want to spend some time on. But in summary, it is this, that despite all the drawbacks, the SPCs are good. It does give you an opportunity of getting in on council policy. In my experience, because councillors, we meet each other, we network with each other, and we can have a different sense at a meeting than members of, you know, in your own case, you're representing the public, if you like, and representing that sector. And very often, I note that that particular kind of representative can be a bit out of it because they just feel that they're not part of the inward buzzing that goes on in groups. On the other hand, I have to say to you as well that I have seen representatives from the sectors in SPCs down through the years who were very strong, who knew what they wanted, and who got support very easily. Okay, so I'll rest my case at that point. Well, if you take any one item, for example, if you take at the moment insecticide, you know, if there was a subcommittee set up under the auspices of your SPC, and you look for volunteers within the SPC, you can also have volunteers outside the SPC. You can now involve other people who are not, you know, nominated to be on the SPC in order to, a good example is housing, where there's already a fair tradition in that some of your members, some of the pillar, well, not your own pillar won't be involved in it, but the PPN, some of the PPN people, if you talk to them, they'll support what I'm talking about, and they'll give you a bit more chapter and verse. Basically, at a meeting like that, speak to the chair beforehand, speak to the meeting coordinator, know what you want, and then you'll probably have a handle, or you know a bit about the other members on the committee as well. Some of them may not be interested, they may only pop in and out even. But if you think there's somebody else in the committee that you're building with, you would ask them, look, I'm going to propose this, will you second it? And away you go, you know.
Okay, excellent. And it would be the chair you'd approach to set up a subcommittee, would it?
Well, it'd be good to ask the chair, get their support, and they'd say, well, you know, Catherine has an idea here and she'd like to propose it. Catherine, will you tell us about that? Otherwise, if you're too much kind of coming at them and throwing it at them, they may miss the point, or they may just feel, no, it's not worked. That's the person who sends out the minutes, who sends out the invitation to attend the meeting in the first place.
Okay.
And,
So it's a council employee.
oh, yes, yeah, absolutely, yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
And sometimes they're very much in tune. But you know, in the public service, there is this belief that if you're at a certain grade, you know everything. And you're transferable across from one department to another. And yesterday you were dealing with roads, and tomorrow you're going to be dealing, you know, with finding out why it is that a river is polluted. So taking those things into account, sometimes you do find that that meeting coordinator has volunteered for the job because they're interested, or they're now in the job and they try and find out a bit more about their portfolio. And part of that finding out is you. you helping them to know what it is. Generally speaking, I find them very facilitative, very open, and very approachable.
Possible things to request from your SPC that might be helpful in creating a herbicide motion. You could ask your council for a report on glyphosate use in all departments. This was something that was done in Dublin City when they were putting together their motion, and it was helpful in so far as they were, they were able to see directly from the council's records how much glyphosate had been used. Glyphosate being the active ingredient in the herbicide Roundup, which is kind of the big bad that people are most actively trying to work against. So yeah, I'll be using the term glyphosate quite often, so that's what that is. So yes, ask your council for a report on glyphosate use across all departments. I've noted a few other possible helpful directives. They're here in this document. I won't go through them all, but they're just things that you might be able to say that a herbicide motion would feed into, and would kind of, the council would be acting, in line with the sustainable use of pesticides directive, for example, if they were to ban the use of glyphosate in their areas. And there's some others there as well. Water Framework, Birds and Natural Habitats Directives, National Climate Action Plan, the local biodiversity action plans, and these specific sustainable development goals. The councils are all locked in to be hitting these sustainable development goal targets. So you can see the goals and the targets here for all the names of them. So they can always be used as kind of ammo to, to push a herbicide motion and why it's useful. So just a note on what the council has remit over. So they have remit over council-owned land, and they have remit over council departments and contractors. This is as far as I know. If anyone else has anything else that they know they have remit over, please let me know. This is what my research brought up. And a note on the local biodiversity action plans. In conversation with a councillor there earlier in the week, he was specifically making the point that the councils are responsible for council-owned land, and this is where they can feed in actions when it comes to the local biodiversity action plans. And so similarly, when it comes to herbicide use, the same. Yeah, across all departments is wording that is important, because that would then be, across Parks Department, which is the ones that are mostly the ones using glyphosate and that kind of thing. So the motions from the other counties, we have some lessons to be learned. So Dublin City, as I mentioned, had a biodiversity officer, Shane Carey, or Casey, who held a presentation on herbicide use and the effects it had on health and wildlife and possible alternatives. Off the back of that, Dublin City Council introduced new guidelines and trialled alternatives. They have put in place alternatives in some areas, but they didn't ban glyphosate, so it does continue to be used in some areas. So that was in 2017 to 2018. And then the Dublin City PPN, the group there, the linkage group there, are putting through another motion on glyphosate. And as the first one was watered down with the changing of words like will to may. And so the new motion is hoping to be stronger and offer more robust ban on the use of glyphosate. So the lessons there are stay firm in fighting for the wording of the motion. And this is the current motion from Dublin City PPN that's going through. As you can see, yeah, I won't go through the whole thing. I've sent this out to you before, but it's very interesting, and some of the wording I think is quite good. And they put in quite a bit of work to really try and get the wording tight. So yeah, documentation on the current no herbicide practice was featured there. And they did put in except in circumstances where invasive plant species are being treated. So this was a decision on their part. I know some counties may not be up for want to include that, but I think the general consensus is that, so some things are needed, but it can be reduced. for example, injecting glyphosate directly into stems rather than just spraying it all over it is a way to reduce the spread of the weed killer into the environment. So I won't go through the whole thing, but that was just kind of a very brief overview of it. In Monaghan, so as mentioned before at one of these meetups from a Monaghan representative, that they actually passed a motion to ban herbicide a number of years ago, but then it was rescinded when they received complaints that areas were looking untidy. So the lesson was that the motion should include awareness and education campaign to get across the reasons for places looking untidy. And another lesson on top of that as well, if a motion is successful and new methods are being used and areas are being left to grow, to get in touch with the council to show your support and to urge others to do the same. So the council is well used to getting lots of complaints, but when they get some positive affirmation of what they're doing is a good thing, that will help keep those plans in action and keep them in use.